A humble waitress threw herself in front of a bullet to save a little girl, then woke up in a hospital room surrounded by 20 of the world's most powerful millionaires. What city are you in? Drop it below and subscribe. Here comes an emotional story with a finale you won't believe. The morning light filtered through the worn blinds of Kimberly's tiny apartment, casting long shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. She lay in bed for a moment longer than she should have, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that had grown larger over the past 3 months. The landlord kept promising to fix it. He never did. 26 years old, and this was her life. A one-room apartment in the roughest part of Chicago, a mattress on the floor, and a refrigerator that hummed too loudly and kept nothing cold enough. But Kimberly had learned long ago that self-pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. She pushed herself up, wincing at the stiffness in her shoulders from yesterday's double shift. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed tired eyes and a face that had aged beyond its years. Not from wrinkles, but from the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. "One more day," she whispered to herself, the same words she'd spoken every morning for the past 4 years. Just one more day, and maybe tomorrow will be different. It never was, but she kept saying it anyway. Rosetti's family restaurant had been her workplace for nearly 3 years now. It wasn't much, a mid-range Italian place in downtown Chicago that catered to business people during lunch and families during dinner. The tips were decent, the hours were long, and the owner, Marco Rossetti, was fair but demanding. Kimberly arrived 15 minutes early, as she always did. The morning prep shift was her favorite time, before the customers arrived, before the chaos began, when she could simply exist in the quiet hum of a kitchen coming to life. "You're here early again," Maria, the head cook, observed from behind the stainless steel counter. She was a heavy-set woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and flour perpetually dusted on her apron. "You know Marco doesn't pay you for those extra minutes." "I know," Kimberly replied, tying her apron strings with practiced efficiency. "I just like the quiet." Maria studied her for a long moment, the way she often did, as if trying to solve a puzzle she couldn't quite figure out. "You're too young to be so tired, Mika. When was the last time you did something just for yourself? Went dancing, maybe? Met a nice young man?" Kimberly laughed, though there was no real humor in it. "Dancing requires energy, Maria, and nice young men require time and money I don't have. Besides," she added, grabbing a stack of menus to polish, "I've got responsibilities." That was the word she always used, responsibilities. It sounded better than debts, better than obligations, better than the crushing weight of her mother's medical bills that seemed to multiply no matter how many shifts she worked. The lunch rush came and went in its usual blur of orders and complaints, and the occasional generous tipper who made Kimberly believe in small miracles. By 3 o'clock, the restaurant had settled into that awkward afternoon lull, too late for lunch, too early for dinner. Kimberly was refilling salt shakers at the back station when the door chimed. She looked up automatically, her customer service smile already forming, and felt something strange flutter in her chest. The man who walked in was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of broad shoulders that suggested either manual labor or expensive personal trainers. His suit probably cost more than 3 months of her rent, charcoal grey and perfectly tailored. But it was his face that made her pause, not handsome in the conventional way, but striking. Angular jaw, dark hair with hints of silver at the temples, despite looking no older than his mid-30s. And eyes, God, those eyes. They were the color of storm clouds, grey and intense, and they swept the restaurant with the kind of assessment that suggested he was cataloguing every exit, every person, every potential threat. He wasn't alone. A little girl clung to his hand, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with the same dark hair but eyes that were warm brown instead of stormy grey. She was wearing a pink dress with ruffles and clutching a stuffed rabbit that had clearly seen better days. "Just 2 today?" Kimberly asked, approaching with menus. The man looked at her then, really looked, and she felt suddenly aware of every flaw. The small stain on her apron she hadn't noticed, the strand of hair escaping her ponytail, the bags under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. "Yes," he said, and his voice was exactly what she would have expected, deep and controlled, the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Somewhere quiet, if possible. My daughter needs to eat, but she's been overwhelmed today." The little girl pressed closer to his leg, and Kimberly felt her heart soften. Whatever else this man was, wealthy, intimidating, impossibly out of her league, he was clearly a father who cared about his child. "I have the perfect spot," she said, gentling her voice in the way she always did with nervous children. "Follow me." She led them to a corner booth, the one tucked away from the main dining area, where the noise level dropped considerably. It was usually reserved for elderly couples who complained about the music being too loud, but something told her this little girl needed the same sanctuary. "This is Lily," the man said as they settled into the booth. The little girl peeked out from behind her rabbit, studying Kimberly with the solemn intensity only children possess. "We're celebrating today, aren't we, sweetheart?" Lily nodded slowly, but her eyes remained guarded. "What are we celebrating?" Kimberly asked, crouching down to bring herself to Lily's eye level. It was something she'd learned years ago. Children trusted you more when you didn't tower over them. "I got through my doctor appointment," Lily whispered, so quietly Kimberly had to lean in to hear, "without crying." "Well, that's incredibly brave," Kimberly said seriously. "I'm 26 years old and I still cry at doctor appointments sometimes. You're much braver than me." For the first time, a tiny smile flickered across Lily's face. "Really? Really? They have those scary paper robes that crinkle whenever you move. Very frightening." Lily giggled, a small, fragile sound, but genuine. The man watched the exchange with an unreadable expression, his grey eyes moving between his daughter and the waitress who had somehow made her smile for the first time all day. "I'm Kimberly," she said, straightening up. "I'll be taking care of you today. Can I start you off with something to drink?" "I'm Alexander," the man said, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, at having offered his first name so readily. He struck Kimberly as the type who usually kept people at arm's length. "Alexander Thornton. And we'll have water for me, and do you have apple juice for Lily?" "We do. And can I let you in on a secret, Lily?" Kimberly leaned closer conspiratorially. "We have the best chocolate cake in all of Chicago. If your dad says it's okay, maybe we can celebrate your bravery with a slice after lunch." Lily's eyes went wide, and she tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, can I? Please." Alexander Thornton looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then back at Kimberly, and for just a moment his stern expression softened into something almost approaching warmth. "I think that can be arranged," he said. Kimberly smiled, her real smile, not the customer service one, and went to get their drinks. She didn't notice the way Alexander's eyes followed her across the restaurant, or the slight furrow that appeared between his brows as if he was trying to figure something out. She didn't know that Alexander Thornton was the CEO of Thornton Industries, one of the largest investment firms in the country. She didn't know that his net worth exceeded $2 billion, or that he owned 3 homes, a private jet, and a yacht he never used because he was always working. She didn't know that he had watched his wife die of cancer 3 years ago, leaving him alone with a daughter who had become increasingly withdrawn and anxious. She didn't know that his board of directors had been pressuring him for months to find a new wife, someone suitable, someone from their world, because they believed a single father running a company was somehow less stable. She didn't know that Lily hadn't smiled at a stranger in over a year. All Kimberly knew was that she had a table to serve, a shift to finish, and bills to pay. The man in the expensive suit was just another customer, another means to an end, another step closer to digging herself out of the hole her life had become. But fate, as it often does, had other plans entirely. The afternoon stretched on in its usual rhythm. Alexander and Lily ordered pasta, plain butter noodles for the little girl, seafood linguine for her father, and Kimberly found herself checking on them more often than strictly necessary. There was something about the pair that drew her in, something she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the way Alexander looked at his daughter with a mixture of fierce love and helpless worry that reminded Kimberly of her own father before he'd passed. Maybe it was Lily herself, a small wounded bird who was clearly trying so hard to be brave. Or maybe it was simply the fact that, for reasons Kimberly couldn't explain, she wanted to make this little girl smile again. "How's the cake?" she asked when she brought out the chocolate slice, complete with a single birthday candle she'd found in the kitchen. Lily stared at the candle with wonder. "But it's not my birthday." "It's your brave day," Kimberly explained. "That's even more important. Make a wish and blow it out." Lily closed her eyes tight, her small face scrunched in concentration, and blew. The candle flame flickered and died, and she opened her eyes with a gasp of delight. "What did you wish for?" Alexander asked, and there was something rough in his voice, something that sounded almost like emotion carefully suppressed. "I can't tell you, Daddy," Lily said seriously, "or it won't come true." Kimberly met Alexander's eyes over his daughter's head, and for a moment something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. The acknowledgement that they were both people carrying heavy weights, trying their best to keep moving forward. Then, the moment passed, and Kimberly was just a waitress again, and he was just a wealthy customer who would leave a generous tip and walk out of her life forever. At least, that's what she thought. What happened next would change everything. And before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave your city in the comments below, and if you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe for more. Now, let's see what happens next. The door to Rosetti's burst open with a violence that shattered the afternoon calm. Kimberly's first instinct was confusion. In 3 years of working here, she'd seen drunk customers, angry customers, customers who screamed about their food being too cold or too hot or not Italian enough. But she had never seen anything like this. The man who stumbled through the entrance was wild-eyed and trembling, his clothes disheveled and his movements jerky in a way that made her stomach drop. In his hand, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, was a gun. "Nobody move!" His voice cracked on the words, high and desperate. "I said nobody move!" The restaurant froze. There were maybe a dozen people inside. A few businessmen finishing late lunches, an elderly couple near the window, the kitchen staff frozen behind the counter. And in the corner booth, Alexander Thornton pulling his daughter behind him with a protective fury that transformed his face into something almost unrecognizable. Kimberly's mind went blank with terror for exactly 3 seconds. Then, strangely, it cleared. She had read somewhere that in moments of true crisis, certain people simply shut off their fear and operate on pure instinct. She had never believed it until now. "Sir," she said, and her voice came out surprisingly steady. "Sir, whatever you need, we can work this out. Nobody has to get hurt here." The gunman's eyes swung to her, wild and unfocused. Up close, she could see how young he was, maybe 22, 23, not a hardened criminal, a desperate kid who had probably never held a gun before today. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "You don't understand. I need money. My little brother, he's sick and the hospital won't treat him without insurance. And I've tried everything. I've tried—" His voice dissolved into something that sounded horrifyingly like a sob, and the gun wavered in his grip. Kimberly felt a strange surge of compassion alongside her terror. She knew that desperation. She lived with it every single day. "I understand," she said softly, taking a small step forward. "I really do. My mother is sick too. Medical bills. They can destroy you. They make you feel like you have no other choice." The young man stared at her, and for a moment, just a moment, something human flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been recognition or hope or the tiniest possibility of connection. Then everything went wrong. The elderly man by the window, perhaps trying to be a hero, lunged for the gunman. There was a shout, a struggle, and the gun went off with a sound like the world ending. Kimberly didn't think. She didn't have time to think. She saw the bullet's trajectory, as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. She saw where it was heading, directly toward the corner booth, where a little girl in a pink dress was frozen in terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. And Kimberly moved. She threw herself forward with every ounce of strength in her body, her arms wrapping around Lily Thornton as she twisted to put her own body between the child and the bullet. She felt the impact like a punch to her side, hot and cold at the same time, and then she was falling, taking the little girl down with her and covering her completely. "Stay down," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if any sound came out. "Stay down, sweetheart, I've got you." The world became a blur of screaming and chaos. She heard more shouts, heard the sound of the gunman being tackled, heard Alexander Thornton's voice cutting through the noise like a blade, demanding to know where his daughter was. "Daddy!" Lily's cry was muffled against Kimberly's chest. "Daddy, the lady saved me!" Then Alexander was there, his hands gentle despite their trembling as he checked Lily for injuries. And Kimberly saw the exact moment his eyes found the blood spreading across her uniform. "Oh, God!" he breathed. "Oh, God, no!" "She's okay," Kimberly managed to say. Her voice sounded strange and far away. "Lily's okay. That's what matters." "You're bleeding!" Alexander's hands were pressing against her side now, trying to stop the flow of crimson that seemed determined to escape. His face was white with shock, and his grey eyes, those storm cloud eyes that had seemed so cold, were wild with something that looked almost like fear. "You're bleeding! You need someone! Call 911 now!" "Already called." Marco's voice came from somewhere distant. "They're on their way." Kimberly tried to smile, to reassure the terrified little girl who was clinging to her father's leg and crying, but darkness was creeping into the edges of her vision. Everything felt heavy and light at the same time, like she was floating underwater. "She's okay," she said again because it seemed important. "Lily's okay." And then everything went black. The first thing Kimberly became aware of was the beeping. It was steady and rhythmic, like a mechanical heartbeat, and it took her foggy brain several long moments to identify it as a heart monitor. Hospital, she thought. I'm in a hospital. The second thing she became aware of was the pain. It radiated from her left side in hot, pulsing waves, dulled by what she assumed were some very strong painkillers, but still present enough to remind her that she was, against all odds, alive. The third thing she became aware of made no sense at all. There were people in her room. A lot of people. Too many people for a standard hospital room, and definitely too many for someone like her, who had no family left except a mother in a nursing home who didn't recognize her own daughter anymore. Kimberly forced her eyes open, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights, and found herself staring at what appeared to be a wall of expensive suits. She counted them, then counted again, because surely she had miscounted. 20. There were 20 people in her hospital room, arranged in a loose semicircle around her bed. Men and women, all of them dressed in clothes that cost more than her annual salary, all of them watching her with expressions that ranged from curious to grateful to something that looked almost like awe. And in the front of them all, standing closest to her bed with Lily clutched in his arms, was Alexander Thornton. "What?" Kimberly croaked, her voice rough from disuse. "Is happening?" Alexander stepped forward, and she could see now that his suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, his face marked with the kind of exhaustion that suggested he hadn't slept in days. Lily reached out toward Kimberly with small, grasping hands. "You're awake," Alexander said, and his voice cracked on the words. "Thank God, you've been unconscious for 3 days. 3 days." Kimberly tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her side. 3 days? But my shifts, Marco? "Your job is fine," Alexander cut in. "Everything is fine. Please, don't try to move. The doctors said the bullet missed your vital organs by less than an inch. You're incredibly lucky to be alive." Lucky wasn't the word Kimberly would have chosen. She felt like she'd been hit by a truck, and she still couldn't understand why there were 20 strangers in her hospital room watching her like she was some kind of zoo exhibit. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Who are all these people?" Alexander turned to look at the assembled group, then back at her. His expression was difficult to read. Gratitude, certainly, but also something more complicated, something that looked almost like guilt. "These are my business associates," he said quietly. "My partners. My friends, such as they are. They came because they wanted to meet the woman who saved my daughter's life. The woman who threw herself in front of a bullet," a silver-haired man in the back added, his voice rough with emotion. "For a child she'd known less than an hour. The woman who showed more courage than any of us have ever witnessed," an elegant woman beside him continued, "in a world where everyone looks out only for themselves." Kimberly felt heat rise to her cheeks. She didn't know what to do with this attention, this praise. She had spent her whole life being invisible. The waitress who brought your food, the girl who worked doubles to pay bills, the nobody from nowhere who didn't matter to anyone. She swallowed hard, trying to find words. "I just did what anyone would do. She was a little girl. I couldn't let anything happen to her." "No, that's where you're wrong," Alexander said softly. He sat down on the edge of her bed, Lily still in his arms, and his grey eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Most people wouldn't. Most people would have frozen or run, or worried about their own safety. You acted without thinking, without any consideration for yourself. You nearly died for my daughter. Lily leaned forward, her small hand reaching out to touch Kimberly's cheek. Her brown eyes were serious and solemn in the way only children's eyes can be. "You're my hero," she said simply. "Like in the stories, you saved me." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Kimberly felt tears spill down her cheeks. The tears seemed to break something in the room. One by one, the suited strangers came forward to introduce themselves, to thank her, to press business cards into her hands, and promise that if she ever needed anything, anything at all, she only had to call. Kimberly learned their names through a haze of painkillers and overwhelming emotion. There was David Chen, founder of a tech empire worth billions. Margaret Williams, who ran a chain of luxury hotels that spanned 3 continents. Robert Hart, whose investment firm had helped shape the modern financial landscape. And on, a parade of wealth and power that made her head spin. But through it all, Alexander stayed. He stayed when the others left, when visiting hours ended and nurses came to check her vitals. He stayed when Lily fell asleep in the chair beside her bed, clutching her battered rabbit like a lifeline. He stayed, and Kimberly didn't know what to make of it. "You should go home," she finally said, when the room had emptied and the night had grown late. "Your daughter needs to sleep in a real bed, and I'm sure you have. Important things to do, companies to run, billions to make." She tried to keep her voice light, but something in it must have betrayed her, because Alexander's expression shifted. "Is that what you think?" he asked quietly. "That I care more about my company than the woman who saved my daughter's life?" "I don't think anything," Kimberly said, which wasn't entirely true. She thought a lot of things. That he was too handsome, too wealthy, too far above her station. That whatever gratitude he felt would fade as soon as the drama of the situation wore off. That people like him didn't actually care about people like her. They just liked the story of caring, the performance of nobility. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, gently, carefully, as if she might break. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Cancer. It was slow and terrible, and I watched her fade away one day at a time. After she was gone, I threw myself into work because I didn't know how to be a person anymore. I didn't know how to be a father. I didn't know how to feel anything except numb." Kimberly held her breath, sensing that he was sharing something he rarely spoke about. "Lily suffered the most," he continued. "She was only 2 when her mother died. She barely remembers her, but she remembers the absence. She became anxious, withdrawn. She stopped trusting people. She hasn't smiled at a stranger in over a year." He paused, his grey eyes finding hers in the dim hospital light. "Until you." "I just talked to her," Kimberly said softly. "I just treated her like a person." "Exactly." Alexander's thumb traced a gentle circle on her palm. "You saw her. Not as the daughter of a billionaire, not as an obligation to be managed, but as a child who needed kindness, and then you nearly died to protect her. So no, Kimberly, I am not going anywhere, not until I understand what kind of person you are and how I can possibly begin to repay you." Kimberly wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that she didn't need repayment, that she hadn't acted for reward, that she was just a waitress from the wrong side of Chicago who had gotten lucky or unlucky, depending on how you looked at it. But she was tired. So tired. And the painkillers were pulling her under again. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Alexander's face, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Little did she know that this moment, this quiet conversation in a hospital room, would change the course of both their lives forever. Recovery, Kimberly discovered, was not a straight line. It was a winding path full of setbacks and small victories, of days when she felt almost normal, and nights when the phantom pain in her side made her cry into her pillow. But through it all, there was Alexander. He came every day without fail. Sometimes he brought Lily, who would curl up in the chair beside Kimberly's bed and read aloud from picture books in her small, serious voice. Sometimes he came alone after his daughter had been put to bed by the nanny, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. Kimberly learned that Alexander had built Thornton Industries from scratch after his parents died in a car accident when he was 22. She learned that he worked 18-hour days, not because he loved money, but because he didn't know how to stop. She learned that his favorite book was To Kill a Mockingbird, and that he cried every time he watched The Lion King with Lily, though he would never admit it. In turn, she told him about her own life, the father who had died of a heart attack when she was 16, leaving behind a mountain of debt. The mother whose early-onset Alzheimer's had stolen her mind piece by piece until she no longer recognized her own daughter. The dreams of college and art and a life beyond waitressing that had been sacrificed on the altar of necessity. "You wanted to be an artist?" Alexander asked one evening, about a week into her hospital stay. He was sitting in what had become his chair, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "A painter, actually." Kimberly smiled, though it was tinged with old sadness. "I used to spend hours in the art room after school, covering canvases with color. My teacher said I had real talent. She helped me apply for a scholarship to the Art Institute of Chicago." "Did you get it?" "I did." Kimberly's voice was quiet. "Full ride. But my dad died 2 weeks before graduation, and my mum, she couldn't handle it. She started forgetting things, getting confused. Someone had to take care of her, pay the bills, keep everything from falling apart, so I declined the scholarship and got a job at Rossetti's instead." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, When he spoke, his voice was rough. "That must have been incredibly difficult, giving up your dreams to take care of others." "It wasn't difficult," Kimberly said. "It was necessary. There's a difference. When someone you love needs you, you don't think about what you're giving up. You just do what needs to be done." Alexander looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You're remarkable, you know that. Most people would be bitter. They would resent the hand life dealt them. But you just keep going, keep smiling, keep treating strangers' children with kindness, even when you have every reason to be cynical." "Bitterness takes too much energy," Kimberly said simply. "I'd rather spend mine on things that matter." The air between them shifted, charged with something unspoken. Alexander leaned forward, and for a wild moment Kimberly thought he might kiss her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she wasn't sure if it was fear or hope or some confusing mixture of both. But then a nurse bustled in to check her vitals, and the moment passed. 2 weeks after the shooting, Kimberly was finally released from the hospital. She'd expected to return to her tiny apartment, to resume her life of double shifts and utility bills and visits to her mother's nursing home. What she had not expected was the limousine waiting for her at the hospital entrance. "What is this?" she demanded, staring at Alexander, who was holding the door open with a look that dared her to argue. "This is your ride," he said calmly, "to your new apartment." I don't have a new apartment. I have my old apartment, the one with the leaky ceiling and the neighbors who sell drugs." "Not anymore." Now Alexander's tone brooked no argument. "You were shot saving my daughter's life. The absolute least I can do is ensure you have a safe place to recover. The apartment is temporary, just until you're back on your feet. It's in a good neighborhood, close to a hospital in case you need follow-up care, and I can't accept that." Kimberly's voice was firm, despite the way her legs trembled. She was still weak, still healing, and the thought of climbing the 4 flights of stairs to her old apartment made her want to cry. But she had her pride. "It's too much. It's not appropriate." "Appropriate?" Alexander's eyebrows rose. "Kimberly, you took a bullet for a 4-year-old. I think we're well past appropriate." "I don't want your money," she said, and there was steel in her voice now. "I didn't save Lily for a reward. I saved her because she's a child, because it was the right thing to do. If you turn it into a transaction, you cheapen what I did." Something flickered in Alexander's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "You're right," he said slowly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply that you acted for reward. I know you didn't. But can you understand that I'm trying to help? That watching you suffer in a terrible apartment while you recover from saving my daughter would be unbearable." And Kimberly studied him for a long moment. She saw the sincerity in his grey eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the car door as if he was bracing for rejection. 2 months, she finally said. "I'll stay in your fancy apartment for 2 months while I recover, and then I'm going back to my life." Alexander nodded, but there was something in his expression that suggested he had other plans. 2 months. Agreed. The apartment was, of course, ridiculous. It took up half a floor in one of Chicago's most exclusive buildings, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the lake and furniture that probably cost more than Kimberly's annual salary. She wandered through the rooms in a daze, touching the granite countertops and the silk curtains, and the bed that was the size of her entire bedroom in her old place. "This is too much," she whispered to the empty rooms. "This is so much too much." But her body was exhausted, and the bed was soft, and before she knew it she had fallen asleep in sheets that felt like clouds. The first week in the apartment was strange. Kimberly spent most of it resting, reading books from the fully stocked library, and trying to wrap her mind around the bizarre turn her life had taken. Alexander called every day, sometimes multiple times. His voice over the phone became something she looked forward to, warm and genuine in a way it never quite was when she saw him in person, as if the distance allowed him to drop his guard. "Lily won't stop talking about you," he told her one evening. "She drew you a picture. It's supposed to be you fighting a dragon, I think, or possibly a large, angry chicken." Kimberly laughed, a real laugh that made her healing side ache. "I'd love to see it. I'll bring it tomorrow, if you're feeling up for visitors." "I'd like that," she said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. When Alexander arrived the next day, he wasn't alone. Lily bounded through the door ahead of him, clutching a piece of paper that she thrust toward Kimberly with barely contained excitement. "I drew you," she announced. "See? That's you with your sword, and that's the bad guy, and that's me in the corner because you saved me." Kimberly studied the drawing with appropriate solemnity. It was, as Alexander had suggested, somewhat ambiguous, a stick figure with what appeared to be a sword, or possibly a very long arm, facing off against something that could have been a dragon, a chicken, or possibly a vacuum cleaner. "It's beautiful," she said, and Lily beamed. "I'm going to hang it somewhere. I can see it every day." "Really?" Lily's eyes went wide. "You really like it?" "I really love it. It's the best picture anyone has ever given me." Lily threw her arms around Kimberly's waist, careful of her injured side in a way that showed someone, probably Alexander, had coached her extensively. The embrace was warm and trusting, and Kimberly felt something crack open in her chest. She had spent so many years taking care of others, her mother, her absent father's memory, the endless parade of customers at the restaurant. She had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, not for what she could do, but for who she was. Alexander watched the interaction with an expression that was difficult to read. When Lily finally released Kimberly and went to explore the apartment's many fascinating corners, he moved closer. "She's attached to you," he said quietly, "more attached than she's been to anyone since her mother died." "Is that a problem?" Kimberly asked uncertainly. "No." Alexander's voice was soft. "It's a miracle. I just worry about what happens when—" He trailed off, but Kimberly understood. When she went back to her real life, when the 2 months ended and she returned to waitressing and tiny apartments and the endless struggle to keep her head above water. "I won't disappear," she said. "I wouldn't do that to her." "I know." Alexander reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so tender and unexpected that Kimberly forgot to breathe. "You're not capable of hurting someone, even unintentionally. It's one of the things I—" He stopped himself, but his hand lingered near her face, and the air between them crackled with tension. "One of the things you—" "What?" Kimberly whispered. Alexander's grey eyes searched her face, and for a moment she thought he might actually say it. Whatever it was that hung between them, unnamed and terrifying. But then Lily came running back into the room, chattering about the fish tank she'd discovered in the study, and the moment shattered like glass. "Come see, Daddy! Come see, Kimberly! There's a fish that looks like Nemo!" Alexander stepped back, his expression shuddering. "We should go. Let you rest." "You don't have to. We'll come back tomorrow." It wasn't a question. "Lily wants to watch movies with you if you're feeling up to it. She's very specific. It has to be The Princess Bride." "I love that movie," Kimberly admitted. "I know." Alexander's smile was small but genuine. "You mentioned it once, in the hospital," Lily remembered. After they left, Kimberly sat in the expensive apartment surrounded by expensive things and wondered when exactly Alexander Thornton had started feeling less like a stranger and more like someone she couldn't imagine living without. But some things, she reminded herself firmly, were not meant to be. Billionaires didn't fall for waitresses outside of fairy tales, and Kimberly had stopped believing in fairy tales a long time ago. She had no idea how wrong she was. The movie nights became a tradition. Every Saturday, Alexander and Lily would arrive at the apartment with arms full of snacks and a carefully curated selection of films that Lily insisted were the best movies in the whole world. They watched The Princess Bride 3 times in a row before Lily agreed to try something new. Kimberly found herself living for those Saturdays. During the week, she continued her recovery. Physical therapy, checkups with doctors, slowly rebuilding her strength. But Saturdays were different. Saturdays were magic. It was during one of these movie nights, about a month into her stay at the apartment, that everything changed. Lily had fallen asleep halfway through Finding Nemo, her small body curled up between them on the enormous sectional couch. Alexander had draped a blanket over her, with the practiced ease of a parent who had done this 1,000 times, and now they sat in comfortable silence, the movie playing softly in the background. "I need to tell you something," Alexander said finally, his voice barely above a whisper to avoid waking Lily. Kimberly's heart stuttered. In her experience, sentences that started with, "I need to tell you something," rarely ended well. "Okay." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, staring at the screen without really seeing it. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "The night of the shooting, I was at Rossetti's for a specific reason, not just lunch with Lily. I was evaluating it." "Evaluating it?" Kimberly repeated, confused. "For what?" "For acquisition." Alexander turned to face her, and his grey eyes were troubled. "My company has been buying up properties in that area for a development project. Rossetti's sits on prime real estate, and the owner has been resistant to selling. I was there to observe the business, to figure out the best approach to, convince him to reconsider." The words hung in the air between them, and Kimberly felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You were going to buy the restaurant, and do what with it?" "Tear it down," Alexander admitted. "Build luxury condominiums. It's a multi-million-dollar project that's been in development for 2 years. He paused, his jaw tight. "But then the shooting happened, and you threw yourself in front of a bullet for my daughter, and I realized that maybe I'd become someone I didn't want to be. Someone who saw buildings instead of businesses, numbers instead of people." Kimberly didn't know what to say. Part of her was angry. Of course, someone like Alexander Thornton would think nothing of destroying a family restaurant that had served the community for decades. But another part of her understood the complexity in his eyes, the genuine remorse in his voice. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. "I've already done it." Alexander's smile was small and wry. "I pulled out of the project, told my board that the development was no longer viable. They're furious with me, but I don't care. Rossetti's stays." Kimberly stared at him, trying to process what she was hearing. "You gave up a multi-million-dollar project for a restaurant." "For a principle," Alexander corrected, "for the reminder that there are things more important than profit, that people's lives and livelihoods matter." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her palm. "You taught me that. You who have every reason to be cynical about the wealthy and powerful showed more humanity in a single moment than I've shown in years." "Alexander?" Kimberly's voice was thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." His eyes held hers, intense and vulnerable, in a way she'd never seen before. "I just needed you to know. I needed you to understand that you've changed me, that knowing you has made me want to be better." The air between them crackled with tension. This time there was no nurse to interrupt, no child waking up to break the spell, just the two of them suspended in a moment that felt like the edge of a cliff. Kimberly should have pulled away. She should have reminded herself of all the reasons this was impossible, the gap in their worlds, the temporary nature of her stay here, the inevitability of returning to a life that had no room for billionaires and penthouse apartments. Instead, she leaned forward, and the kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. But then Alexander's hand came up to cup her face, and something sparked between them, and suddenly the kiss was deeper, more urgent, filled with all the things they hadn't been able to say. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Lily stirred on the couch between them. "I'm still asleep," she mumbled without opening her eyes. "Don't stop on my account." Kimberly couldn't help it. She laughed. The absurdity of it all, the impossibility, the sheer improbability of this moment, it bubbled up inside her and spilled out as laughter that was half joy and half terror. Alexander watched her with a soft smile. "She's been hoping for this, you know. She told me last week that she wanted you to be her new mommy." "Alexander, I'm not asking you for anything," he said quickly. "I know this is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this shouldn't work. But I needed you to know how I feel, and I needed to know." He paused, vulnerability plain on his face. "Do you feel the same?" Kimberly thought about her tiny apartment waiting for her, about the medical bills that still piled up, about the life of struggle and survival that had been her reality for so long. She thought about her mother, who no longer recognized her, and her father, who had died before his time, and all the dreams she had sacrificed along the way. And then she thought about Alexander's grey eyes and Lily's small hand in hers, and the way she had felt more alive in the past month than she had in years. "Yes," she whispered, "I feel the same." The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen moments and growing connection. Alexander's schedule was brutal, meetings and calls and crises that demanded his attention at all hours, but he carved out time for her anyway. They had dinners where they talked for hours, walks along the lakefront where Lily ran ahead of them, pointing out every dog she saw. Quiet evenings where they simply existed in the same space, reading or working or doing nothing at all. Kimberly began to paint again. Alexander had discovered her abandoned dream, and despite her protests, had converted one of the apartment's spare rooms into a studio. She stood there the first time he showed her, surrounded by canvases and brushes and every type of paint imaginable, and cried. "You didn't have to do this," she said, even as her fingers itched to pick up a brush. "It's too much." "It's not enough," Alexander replied. "Nothing will ever be enough to repay what you did for my daughter. But if I can give you back something you lost, that's a start." So she painted. At first the images were dark, shadows and storms and abstract representations of all the pain she'd been carrying for years. But as the days passed, color began to creep back in. Sunrises over Lake Michigan, Lily's laughing face, Alexander's eyes, grey and warm and full of something that looked a lot like love. But not everything was perfect. The outside world had a way of intruding on their bubble of happiness. It came in the form of Victoria Chase. Victoria was everything Kimberly was not. Tall, elegant, born into wealth and bred for sophistication. She was also Alexander's former fiancée, a relationship that had ended 2 years ago, but that, according to the society pages Kimberly had foolishly started reading, had been the match of the decade. "Alex, darling." Victoria's voice was honeyed poison as she swept into Alexander's office during one of Kimberly's rare visits. "I heard about your little situation. So brave of you to take in a stray." Kimberly felt her face flame with humiliation. She stood to leave, but Alexander caught her hand. "Victoria." His voice was ice. "Kimberly saved my daughter's life. She's more valuable to me than a dozen society connections. If you can't treat her with respect, you can leave." Victoria's eyes narrowed, but she was too practiced to show real anger. "Of course, darling. I didn't mean to offend. I'm simply concerned about appearances. The board is talking, you know. A waitress in your penthouse apartment. People are starting to wonder. Let them wonder." Alexander's arm came around Kimberly's waist, possessive and protective. "And it's time you learned something, Victoria. I don't care what people think. I don't care about appearances or society or any of the nonsense that used to matter to me. What I care about is my daughter, my company, And this woman. Everything else is noise. Victoria left shortly after, her departure a masterclass in barely concealed fury. But her words lingered, echoing in Kimberly's mind long after she was gone. "Maybe she's right," Kimberly said quietly, after Alexander had escorted Victoria out. "Maybe this is crazy. I'm not part of your world, Alexander. I don't know the rules. I don't know the people. I'm just a waitress who got lucky or unlucky and ended up here." Alexander turned to face her, his expression fierce. "You are not just anything. You're the bravest person I've ever met. You're kind and genuine and real in a way that most people in my life have never been. Victoria and everyone like her, they're the ones who don't belong, not you. But you're bored. Can go to hell." Alexander's hands cupped her face, gentle despite the intensity in his voice. "I've spent my entire adult life building a company, an empire, playing by rules that someone else made. I'm done. You showed me what really matters, Kimberly. You showed me that life is too short and too precious to waste on appearances and expectations. I want to be with you. I want to build something real with you. I don't care what anyone else thinks." Kimberly searched his eyes, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that he might not mean what he was saying. She found none. "Okay," she said softly. "Then let's build something real." Alexander's smile was like the sun coming out after a storm. He pulled her close, holding her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. Neither of them noticed the photographer outside the window, or the way Victoria Chase smiled as she climbed into her car, phone already in hand. The storm was coming, they just didn't know it yet. The headlines hit 3 days later. "Billionaire's secret shame. Alexander Thornton's new gold-digger girlfriend exposed." Kimberly stared at her phone, her morning coffee growing cold in her hands as she scrolled through article after article. Each one was worse than the last. They had dug up everything. Her father's debt, her mother's medical bills, her address in the bad part of town, even her old social media posts from years ago, taken out of context and twisted into something unrecognizable. Waitress who saved billionaire's daughter, now living in luxury apartment, paid for by grateful father, or is it more than gratitude? Sources close to the family say Kimberly Masters has been milking the situation for everything she can get. Former colleague describes her as always looking for a way out of her situation. Who wouldn't use a billionaire? The words blurred together, each one a knife to her chest. She knew who had done this. Victoria Chase's perfectly manicured fingerprints were all over it, even if her name appeared nowhere in the articles. Kimberly's phone rang. Alexander's name flashed on the screen, but she couldn't answer it. Couldn't bear to hear him try to fix this, to make it better when they both knew the truth. She didn't belong in his world. She never had. She let it go to voicemail. Then she let the next call go to voicemail too. And the next. Instead, she began to pack. It didn't take long. Despite the luxury apartment, Kimberly had never really moved in. Not fully. Her clothes still fit in the small suitcase she'd brought from the hospital. Her paintings were the only thing that gave her pause, but she left them behind. They belonged here, in this life that had never really been hers. She was almost to the door when it burst open. Alexander stood in the doorway, breathing hard, his suit rumpled and his tie askew. He looked like he had run from wherever he'd been. His grey eyes found the suitcase in her hand, and something in his expression shattered. "No," he said, just that one word, raw and desperate. "Kimberly, no, please." "You've seen the articles." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "They're lies, all of it, twisted, manipulated lies. Victoria went to 3 different tabloids with... It doesn't matter who planted them." Kimberly cut him off, and the weariness in her voice seemed to age her by years. "What matters is that they're right. Not about the gold digging or the manipulation, but about the fundamental truth underneath all of it. I don't belong in your world, Alexander. I never did. That's not true, isn't it? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm a waitress, Alexander. A waitress with medical debt and a mother in a nursing home and absolutely nothing to offer someone like you. The only reason I'm even here is because I got shot. That's not a foundation for a relationship. That's just guilt dressed up as something else. You think that's what this is? Alexander's voice cracked. Guilt? Kimberly, I love you. I love you. Not because you saved my daughter, though I will be grateful for that until the day I die, but because of who you are, because of your kindness, your strength, your refusal to let life make you bitter. I love the way you talk to Lily like she's a real person. I love the way you paint, like you're putting your whole soul on the canvas. I love— Stop! The word came out broken. Please stop, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Good. Alexander closed the distance between them, his hands finding her face, tilting it up so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. It should be hard. Because what we have is worth fighting for, Kimberly. It's worth the headlines and the gossip and every cruel word Victoria Chase can throw at us. It's worth everything. Tears streamed down Kimberly's face now, but she forced herself to pull away. You don't understand. It's not about what's worth fighting for. It's about what's fair to you, to Lily, to your company and your reputation and everything you've built. You're willing to sacrifice all of that for me, and I won't let you. It's not your choice to make. Yes, it is. Kimberly's voice was quiet, but firm. I'm choosing to walk away. I'm choosing to go back to my real life, where I belong. And I'm choosing to do it now, before we're in any deeper, before Lily gets even more attached, before this becomes even harder than it already is. She picked up her suitcase and moved toward the door. Alexander didn't try to stop her, not physically, but his words followed her like ghosts. If you walk out that door, I won't chase you. I'll respect your decision even though it's killing me, but I need you to know something, Kimberly. I need you to know that this, you and me, this isn't about gratitude or guilt or circumstance. This is real. What I feel for you is real. And if you ever change your mind, if you ever decide that maybe, just maybe, you deserve to be happy, I'll be here. I'll be waiting. Kimberly paused at the door. Every cell in her body screamed at her to turn around, to run back into his arms, to believe that love could somehow conquer the impossible gap between their worlds. But she had spent her whole life being practical, being realistic, being the one who sacrificed for others, because that's what you did when you loved someone. Goodbye, Alexander, she whispered, and she walked out the door. The apartment she returned to was exactly as she'd left it, small, cramped, with the same water stain on the ceiling and the same humming refrigerator that kept nothing cold enough. It should have felt like coming home. Instead, it felt like a prison. 3 weeks passed, then 4. Kimberly went back to work at Rossetti's, where Marco had kept her job despite her long absence. She smiled at customers and memorized orders and pretended that her heart wasn't breaking a little more with each passing day. She didn't read the news anymore, couldn't bear to see Alexander's name or wonder if Victoria Chase had finally gotten what she wanted. She threw herself into work instead, picking up extra shifts, saving money that would never be enough to fill the hole her mother's medical bills had created. At night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the water stain and thought about grey eyes and expensive suits and a little girl who had called her a hero. Maria, the cook at Rossetti's, watched her with worried eyes, but said nothing. It wasn't until the end of Kimberly's 4th week back that she finally spoke up. "You're destroying yourself, Mija," she said quietly, catching Kimberly during a rare, slow moment. "Anyone can see it. You've lost weight. You don't smile anymore, not really. Whatever happened while you were gone, it changed you." "I'm fine," Kimberly said automatically. "You're lying." Maria's voice was gentle but firm. "And you're bad at it. Whatever you're running from, whatever you gave up, was it worth it? Kimberly opened her mouth to say yes, of course, she had made the right choice. But the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, she wasn't sure anymore. That night, alone in her tiny apartment, Kimberly finally allowed herself to cry. Really cry, not the silent tears she'd been holding back for weeks, but great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for the life she'd almost had. She cried for Lily, who had trusted her, and who she had abandoned. She cried for Alexander, who had offered her everything and whom she had left standing alone in a luxury apartment. And she cried for herself, for the girl who had given up art school to take care of her mother, for the woman who had worked double shifts for years with nothing to show for it but exhaustion, for the person who had finally found something good and had been too afraid to hold on to it. When the tears finally stopped, Kimberly lay on her mattress in the dark and faced a truth she had been avoiding for weeks. She had made a mistake. A terrible, devastating, possibly irreparable mistake. The question was it too late to fix it? The next morning, Kimberly arrived at work to find Lily Thornton sitting in one of the booths. She was alone. No father, no nanny, just a small girl in a pink dress clutching a battered stuffed rabbit and looking around the restaurant with determined eyes. When she spotted Kimberly, her whole face lit up. "I found you," Lily announced, as if this were a game of hide and seek and not potentially a kidnapping situation. "Daddy said you moved away, but I knew you'd be here. I remembered the name of the restaurant." Kimberly's heart seized in her chest. "Lily, sweetheart, does your daddy know you're here?" "He's outside." Lily waved a dismissive hand. "He wanted to come in, but I told him this was girl talk. He's very sad, you know. He pretends he's not, but I can tell. He doesn't smile anymore. Not for real." Kimberly sank into the booth across from Lily, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. "Honey, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just thought you thought wrong." Lily's voice was surprisingly fierce for a 4-year-old. "Daddy loves you. I love you. And you love us too, I know you do, because you saved me, and you can't save someone you don't love. That's the rule." "The rule?" "The hero rule." Lily leaned forward, her brown eyes intense. "In all the stories, the hero only saves people they love. That's how it works. So you love us, which means you shouldn't have left, which means you need to come back." The logic was so simple, so childlike, so perfectly right, that Kimberly felt fresh tears threatening to fall. "It's not that simple, sweetheart," she said softly. "There are things, grown-up things, that make it complicated." Like what? Kimberly thought about all the reasons she had given herself. The media scrutiny, the class difference, the fear of not being good enough. But sitting here, looking into Lily's earnest face, all of those reasons seemed to shrink, to fade, to become exactly what they were, excuses. "I was scared," she admitted finally. "I was scared that I didn't deserve to be happy, that I wasn't good enough for your daddy or for you, that eventually you'd both realize you'd made a mistake." Lily considered this with the gravity only a child can muster. Then she reached across the table and took Kimberly's hand. "That's silly," she said simply. "You're my hero. Heroes are always good enough." Kimberly looked at this small, brave girl who had lost her mother before she could remember her, who had spent a year afraid to trust anyone new, who had somehow decided that a wounded waitress from the wrong side of town was worth loving, and she made a decision. "Is your daddy still outside?" she asked. Lily's face split into a grin that seemed to light up the whole restaurant. "I'll go get him." Alexander walked into Rossetti's like a man approaching his own execution, shoulders set, jaw tight, eyes full of a desperate hope he was trying very hard to hide. He looked different than the last time she'd seen him, thinner, paler, as if the past month had aged him by years. He stopped a few feet from the booth where Kimberly still sat, frozen in place. Lily stood between them, her small hand in his, looking back and forth like a spectator at a tennis match. "She says you want to talk," Alexander said carefully, as if the words might shatter if he spoke them too loudly. "Is that true?" Kimberly opened her mouth to respond, but what came out wasn't what she'd planned. Instead of calm, measured words, what emerged was a sob, raw and broken, and completely beyond her control. "I'm sorry," she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I was scared and stupid, and I ran away when I should have stayed and fought. I told myself I was protecting you, but really I was just protecting myself from getting hurt. And I hurt all of us instead. And I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but—" She didn't get to finish. Alexander crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulled her out of the booth, and kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative like their first kiss had been. It was desperate and hungry and filled with all the pain of the past month, all the loneliness and regret and longing. Kimberly clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had been spinning off its axis, and she felt something in her chest, finally click back into place. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lily was bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. "Does this mean you're coming home?" she demanded. "Does this mean we can do movie nights again? Does this mean—" "Yes," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion. He hadn't let go of Kimberly, his arms still wrapped around her as if he was afraid she might disappear. "Yes to all of it. If—" He looked down at her, and the vulnerability in his grey eyes made her heart ache. "If that's what you want—" "That's what I want," Kimberly whispered. "That's all I want. You and Lily and whatever comes with that. I'm done running. I'm done being afraid. I'm done pretending that I don't deserve good things." Alexander's smile was like sunrise, slow and warm and full of promise. "Thank God. Because I have been absolutely miserable without you, and Lily has been making my life hell." "I have not!" Lily protested indignantly. "You painted my briefcase pink. It needed color," Lily said primly. "Everything was too sad." Kimberly laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. The sound was rusty from disuse, but it felt like coming alive again. The next few hours passed in a blur. Alexander made phone calls, to cancel meetings, to rearrange his schedule, to inform his assistant that he would be unavailable for the rest of the day. Kimberly told Marco she was taking an early lunch and might not be back, and the old man just smiled and waved her off with knowing eyes. They went back to the penthouse apartment, where Kimberly's paintings still hung on the walls and her art supplies still waited in the studio. She walked through the rooms she had thought she'd never see again, touching everything as if to make sure it was real. "I kept everything," Alexander said quietly, watching her from the doorway. "I couldn't bring myself to pack it away. It felt too much like giving up." "I'm sorry," Kimberly said again, "for leaving, for not believing that this could be real." "I understand why you did it." Alexander crossed to her, taking her hands in his. The media attention, Victoria's scheming, the pressure of being thrown into a world you never asked to be part of. It was overwhelming. I should have done more to protect you from it. It wasn't your job to protect me. It was my job to trust you, to trust us. Kimberly squeezed his hands. "I won't make that mistake again. Neither will I." Alexander's expression grew serious. "I've been doing some thinking over the past month, about my priorities, about what really matters, and I've made some changes." "What kind of changes?" I stepped back from day-to-day operations at Thornton Industries, promoted my COO to CEO, and took a chairman role instead. I still have influence, still have responsibility, but I'm not chained to a desk 18 hours a day anymore. He paused, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "I want to be present. For Lily. For you. For the life I want to build with both of you." Kimberly stared at him, stunned. "You gave up your company. For us." "I didn't give it up. I just reprioritized." Alexander smiled. You taught me that, that there are things more important than profit, than success, than all the metrics by which I used to measure my worth. You taught me that being loved, really loved for who you are rather than what you have, is worth more than all the money in the world. Alexander, Kimberly's voice broke. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay, he said simply. Say you'll let me prove to you every day that you deserve to be happy, that you deserve to be cherished, that you deserve everything good life has to offer. I'll stay, she whispered. I'll stay. Lily, who had been playing quietly in the corner while the adults talked, looked up with hopeful eyes. Forever? Kimberly looked at this little girl who had claimed her heart from the first moment, and then at the man who had somehow seen past all her defenses to the person underneath. Forever, she confirmed. Lily let out a whoop of joy and launched herself at both of them, wrapping her small arms around their legs in a hug that almost knocked them over. Alexander caught Kimberly's eye over his daughter's head, and they both started laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from pure, uncomplicated joy. The days that followed were not without challenges. Victoria Chase, furious that her scheme had backfired, tried to plant more stories in the tabloids. The Thornton Industries board members grumbled about their CEO's sudden departure from the spotlight. Society watched and whispered, waiting for the fairy tale to fall apart. But it didn't fall apart. Instead, it grew stronger. Kimberly returned to painting with a fervor she hadn't felt since she was 18 years old. Alexander converted the penthouse's rooftop terrace into an outdoor studio where she could work surrounded by the Chicago skyline. Her paintings, bright and bold and full of life, caught the attention of a gallery owner who happened to be one of Alexander's business contacts, and soon she had her first exhibition scheduled. She continued to visit her mother at the nursing home, though now she could afford to move her to a better facility with specialized Alzheimer's care. Her mother still didn't recognize her most days, but on the good days, the increasingly rare good days, there was a flicker of something in her eyes that looked almost like peace. She knows you're happy, the head nurse told Kimberly one afternoon. I've been doing this a long time, and I can always tell. Even when the memories fade, the feelings stay. She feels your happiness. Kimberly held her mother's hand and cried, but they were good tears this time. Healing tears. 6 months after Kimberly had walked out of the penthouse apartment convinced she would never return, Alexander took her to dinner at Rossetti's. Marco had closed the restaurant for a private event, filling it with flowers and candles, and all the people who had become their makeshift family. Maria from the kitchen, Marco himself, the 20 millionaires who had crowded into her hospital room so many months ago. And Lily, of course, who was practically vibrating with excitement about a secret she had promised not to tell. "What's going on?" Kimberly asked, looking around at the transformed restaurant. "Alexander, what is all this?" Alexander led her to the corner booth. Their booth, the one where she had first served him and Lily, the one where a desperate young man with a gun had changed all their lives forever. 6 months ago, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I walked into this restaurant looking for a business opportunity. I found something infinitely more valuable. I found you who showed me kindness when you had every reason to be guarded. You who made my daughter smile for the first time in a year. You who threw yourself in front of a bullet without a second thought for someone you'd known less than an hour. He dropped to one knee, and the restaurant erupted in gasps. Kimberly Masters, Alexander said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. You taught me what courage really looks like, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. You taught me that love isn't something you find. It's something you build day by day, choice by choice, and I want to spend the rest of my life building something beautiful with you. He opened the box, revealing a ring that sparkled in the candlelight. Elegant and simple and perfect. Will you marry me? Will. Kimberly looked at the man kneeling before her. at the little girl bouncing on her toes nearby, at the room full of people who had become witnesses to the most improbable love story she could have imagined. She thought about the waitress she had been 6 months ago, tired, struggling, convinced that happiness was something that happened to other people. She thought about the woman she was now, healing, hoping, learning to believe that she deserved good things. And she thought about the woman she wanted to become, brave enough to accept love when it was offered, strong enough to build a life with this man and his daughter, bold enough to paint her future in colors she had once thought were only for other people. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Alexander slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms as the restaurant exploded in cheers. Lily squeezed between them, demanding to be part of the hug, and for a long moment the three of them just held each other, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by love, by the miraculous chain of events that had begun with a bullet and ended with a promise. Later, after the champagne had been poured and the congratulations had been offered, Alexander and Kimberly stood on the rooftop terrace of their home, looking out over the city lights of Chicago. Lily had been tucked into bed, exhausted from excitement, and the night was quiet and still. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Kimberly asked softly. "If I hadn't been working that day, if you'd gone to a different restaurant, if I hadn't done what I did?" "Every day," Alexander admitted, "and every day I'm grateful. Not for the shooting, God, never for that, but for whatever twist of fate brought us together, for whatever cosmic force decided that Alexander Thornton needed to learn how to live again and sent him a woman brave enough to teach him." "I didn't teach you anything," Kimberly protested. "I was a mess. I'm still a mess. You taught me everything." Alexander turned her to face him, his grey eyes soft in the moonlight. "You taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. You taught me that love is worth fighting for, even when everything seems impossible. You taught me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be given freely by people brave enough to risk everything." Kimberly felt tears prick her eyes. Happy tears, healing tears, tears that washed away the last of her doubts and fears. "I love you," she said. "I love you, and I love Lily, and I love this life we're building together, even when it's hard, even when I'm scared, even when the world tries to convince us we don't make sense." "We make perfect sense," Alexander said. "We make the only sense that matters." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas playing out below. But for Kimberly, standing in the arms of the man she loved, the universe had never felt more perfectly aligned. She had spent her whole life being practical, being careful, being the girl who sacrificed her dreams, because that's what you did when life didn't give you choices. But now, she had a choice. Now, she had a future, bright with possibility, painted in colors she had once thought were only for other people. She took Alexander's hand, and together they walked into their future.